This story is a work of fiction, inspired by real events. Names, dates, locations, and identifying details have been changed or dramatized to protect privacy and enhance the narrative. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental or used fictitiously. This content is intended for entertainment and educational purposes only. It does not aim to glorify crime, promote violence, or pass judgment on real individuals. Viewer discretion is advised. Some scenes may contain mature, disturbing, or triggering content. What you are about to watch could have happened anywhere, to anyone. It's inspired by real events. Whispers of truth, buried beneath layers of fiction. We've changed the names, the dates, the locations, but the emotions, the betrayal, the fear, those are real. This story is not meant to accuse, only to reveal, to make you question, who do you really trust? If stories like this keep you thinking, long after they end, hit subscribe, smash like, and drop your theory in the comments. Now watch closely, before the truth disappears again.
Elena's laughter filled the kitchen that morning, sharp and bright against the scrape of cutlery and the hiss of the kettle. To anyone passing by, it was the sound of a marriage untouched by shadows. A devoted wife. A steady husband. The picture of ordinary happiness. But ordinary is deceptive. Her husband, Mark, sat quietly at the table, watching. His gaze never left her, though his expression gave nothing away. To neighbors, his silence was devotion. To friends, it was shyness. But silence can mean many things. Sometimes, it is the calm before the break. Elena played her role flawlessly. She kissed his cheek, poured his coffee, asked about his day. But the tenderness had grown mechanical, a performance rehearsed too often. And Mark, though he said nothing, noticed every misplaced smile, every phone call taken in another room. By night, Elena's laughter was different. Louder. Riskier. At work, her boss, David, drew it out of her with a power that intoxicated her and poisoned everything she left behind at home. This was Elena's life, two worlds, carefully balanced, dangerously close to colliding. And soon, they would. Because love, when fractured, does not fade. It sharpens. It waits. And then it strikes. Elena's world sparkled with the details of a woman who wanted it all to look right. Framed photographs of vacations, cards tucked into drawers, lists scrawled on scraps of paper and pinned to the fridge. To anyone looking in, she had built a beautiful life. Her friends adored her kindness. She was the one who remembered, who noticed, who gave more than she ever asked for in return. At the office, her wit and presence commanded a room. Even David, arrogant and untouchable, softened when she walked in. To him, Elena was not just an employee. She was possession, temptation, distraction. But at home, the stage was different. Mark noticed the perfume that lingered on her clothes, not the one he had ever bought. He noticed the lateness of her nights, the explanations too rehearsed. His silences lengthened, heavy enough to feel like a weight pressing into the air. He didn't confront her. He didn't argue. He simply watched. That stillness unnerved her more than shouting ever could. Elena moved between her worlds, adored by friends, desired by her boss, tolerated, perhaps even studied, by her husband. The mask of perfection was still intact, but hairline cracks had begun to stretch across its surface. She had built a beautiful world. But beauty built on secrets cannot last. And when it breaks, it cuts deeper than anyone can imagine. The first fractures were so small, they seemed invisible. A laugh that sounded forced. A dinner that ended too quickly. The kind of silences between husband and wife that weren't filled with comfort, but with distance. Her friends noticed. Elena still smiled, but it no longer reached her eyes. She was thinner, not in body, but in spirit, stretched too tightly by secrets. Calls unanswered. Texts delayed. Nights where she claimed to be working late that ended with her slipping quietly into bed beside Mark, his back turned, his breathing steady. David was changing too. The man who once thrilled her now cut her down in subtle ways. Compliments sharpened into mockery. His affection came with reminders of her place, disposable, replaceable. He wanted control. And the more he pushed, the more Elena felt trapped. Mark said little, but his silences had weight. At dinner he would ask, "Another late night," with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. When she answered, his fork would pause halfway to his mouth. He would nod, too slowly, before returning to his meal. Small gestures, but they carried an unspoken warning, "I see you." Elena began to feel the walls closing in. David's arrogance suffocated her at work. Mark's watchfulness suffocated her at home. Her life was becoming a cage. She told herself she had to end it. Not for love of Mark, but for herself. She was tired of being mocked, tired of feeling like a possession instead of a person. She wanted to reclaim her dignity. But secrets don't end quietly. They end violently. And Elena's end was already moving toward her. The company party shimmered with noise and light, the kind of night meant to celebrate success but built to hide everything beneath it. Champagne hissed from freshly opened bottles, laughter erupted too loud to be sincere, and the air itself smelled of perfume, sweat, and pride. Elena walked through it all as if in a dream. She had already made her decision. Tonight, she would end it. David saw her immediately. He always did. His presence was magnetic, the kind of attention that once thrilled her but now made her skin tighten. He crossed the room with the confidence of a man who believed the world belonged to him. "Elena," he said softly, his hand closing over her arm, "you look perfect." She smiled, but only out of habit. "We need to talk." He chuckled, that familiar, grating laugh that told her he didn't take her seriously. "Not here. You'll ruin the mood." Her tone hardened. "No, David. I mean it. I'm done." The word "done" hung between them, cutting through the noise. For a heartbeat, David just stared. Then, slowly, his smile returned, thinner this time. "You're not thinking clearly," he said. "You always say things you don't mean." "I mean it," she whispered. The edges of his mask began to crack. "You think you can walk away from me? You think your husband, that dull little man, can give you what I can?" That word, husband, landed like a slap. Anger rose in her throat before she could stop it. "He's not dull," she said, voice trembling. "He's kind. He's real. And he's the best I've ever had." The noise of the party seemed to fade. David's jaw tightened, his pupils narrowing. His hand slipped from her arm, but only so he could hide the tremor in it. Around them, glasses clinked, a laugh broke across the room, but something colder had entered the air. Elena turned to leave. She felt her heart pounding, heat climbing her neck. It wasn't victory she felt, it was dread. For the first time, she saw something in David's eyes she had never seen before. Something that frightened her. At the bar, David's hand found the stem of a wineglass. He stared at her retreating figure through the crowd. The stem cracked beneath his grip, a thin line of blood blooming on his palm. He didn't flinch. He just kept watching her. Elena walked faster, weaving through the crowd. The laughter around her was too loud now, too false. As she stepped outside, the night air hit her like water, cold, cleansing, but sharp enough to sting. The bass of the music thudded behind her as she crossed the parking lot toward the car. From the open doors of the venue, David stood framed in the glow of light, his expression unreadable. He pressed his bleeding hand against his jacket pocket and smiled, not warmth, but promise. Inside the car, Mark sat waiting. The headlights cut through the dark, and when she opened the door, he looked at her briefly, calm, polite, unreadable. "Everything all right?" She nodded too quickly. Fine. Let's just go home. The drive was silent except for the steady hum of the tires. Mark's hands gripped the wheel just a little too tight. Elena turned her face toward the window, city lights sliding past in streaks of gold. But even as she stared into the blur, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still watching her. Somewhere behind them, back at the party, David stood alone amid the laughter and lights, his blood drying dark against his palm. And for the first time in his life, David Williams wasn't smiling. The party lights had died hours ago, but in David's mind, they still flickered, flashes of gold and laughter, a stage replaying the same humiliation over and over again. My husband is the best I've ever had. The words refused to leave him. They looped endlessly, each replay carving something out of him. He sat in his apartment's half-light, the city below blurring through rain-slicked glass. A half-empty bottle stood beside him. The wine was warm. The blood on the rim of the broken glass had dried to a dull brown. He stared at his phone. Her contact name still glowed on the screen. Messages stacked beneath it, sweet nothings, stolen plans, a history that felt like it belonged to someone else. He typed, "You don't mean that." Deleted it. Typed again, "We should talk." Deleted that too. The silence in the room pressed against him. David was a man who built his life on control, contracts, subordinates, order. But tonight, control was gone. He could feel the walls closing in, the sound of the clock too loud, his pulse thudding in his ears. He rose suddenly, knocking over the glass. Red wine splashed across the floor, staining the cream carpet like a spreading wound. He grabbed his jacket and stepped into the corridor. Rain lashed the windows. He drove without thinking, the wipers slashing rhythmically against the windshield. His car slowed near her street. The house was dark except for a single upstairs light, the faint golden square of a life that no longer included him. He parked 2 blocks away. He didn't get out. He just sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel until the leather creaked. For a long time, he stared at that window. In his mind, he saw her beside her husband, whispering, laughing, mocking him. His breath fogged the glass. He slammed his palm against the wheel once, a dull thud in the rain-filled night. "You don't get to walk away," he whispered to the empty car. His voice trembled, half plea, half promise. But he didn't move. The engine idled, headlights cutting through the downpour. Eventually, he turned the car around and disappeared into the wet streets. Back in his apartment, dawn began to pale the city. He sank into the chair again, exhausted, eyes open, unblinking. And somewhere across the city, the first light touched a house where everything was still, too still. A call came through at 7:42 a.m. A woman was found unresponsive in her home. The sound of sirens broke the morning quiet. Neighbors gathered in their robes and slippers as paramedics carried a stretcher through the doorway. On it lay Elena, motionless, her skin pale against the linen sheet. Mark was in the driveway, barefoot, his face streaked with tears and sweat. He held a blanket around his shoulders, muttering her name again and again. "Elena. Please, Elena." His voice cracked each time. Inside, detectives moved with quiet precision. There was no forced entry. No shattered windows. A single glass of red wine stood on the counter, untouched. Her phone was still plugged in beside the bed, screen glowing faintly with unread messages. One of them was from David. "You don't get to humiliate me and walk away." Sent at 2:17 a.m. Another message had been typed but never sent. Just one word, "Sorry." The lead detective looked up. "Find him." By noon, the story had escaped the walls of the precinct. A headline guessed. By evening, it became fact. By nightfall, David Williams, powerful executive, accused of killing his lover. Camera crews gathered outside his office. Reporters shouted questions he couldn't answer. He looked like a man undone, hair disheveled, eyes rimmed red, still wearing yesterday's shirt. When detectives brought him in, he didn't resist. "Where were you between midnight and 3? "Home," he said quickly. Too quickly. "Can anyone confirm that?" He hesitated. "No. I was alone." The detective's gaze lingered. "You sound nervous, Mr. Williams." "I'm tired," he whispered. "Of course you are," she replied. "Guilt does that." To the watching world, it was already over. A jealous boss. A rejected lover. A woman dead hours after saying the words that shattered his pride. Every detail fit. Every headline screamed his guilt. But behind the evidence, something was missing, something too quiet to notice yet. The truth was still there. Buried beneath tears, wine stains, and silence. And soon, it would surface. Science arrived in envelopes and silence. Lividity fixed where the body had first lain, not where it was found. Petechiae circled the eyes. Deep pressure bruising marked the base of the neck, a grip sustained, deliberate. Time of death, between 12:05 and 12:25 a.m. The message from David, "You don't get to humiliate me and walk away," had been sent at 2:17. The timeline cracked. His rage was real. His timing was impossible. The smartwatch on Elena's wrist told the rest, a sudden spike at 12:13, movement down the hall, then a collapse of steps. Luminol filled the kitchen with a blue bloom invisible to daylight, faint streaks leading toward the bedroom, where the bed had been stripped and remade with careful hands. Under her fingernails, partial male DNA, not David's. In the bathroom hamper, a damp towel smelling of bleach. On the doorframe, a fiber matching the elastic weave of a black watch strap. Detective Reyes studied the evidence table, fingers drumming once, twice. "It fits too neatly," he muttered. "Real life never fits this well." Mark still wore the same watch he'd worn in every photograph, a habit he called practical. He arrived at each follow-up interview composed, sorrow folded into civility. Yet when asked about the scratches on his arm, he adjusted his cuff before he spoke. "It's nothing," he said softly. "Gardening." No one had ever seen him garden. Each answer from him left a small echo, polite, precise, rehearsed. Each new piece of evidence shortened that echo by a breath. The case no longer belonged to the jealous boss. It was drifting home. When the trial opened, the air inside the courtroom felt refrigerated. Camera shutters snapped like insects. Reporters whispered names into recorders. The prosecution didn't thunder. It counted. Time of death window, 12:05 to 12:25 a.m. Smartwatch heart rate spike, 12:13. Thermostat lowered manually, 12:19. Router activity, 12:22 and 12:31. Each timestamp built the outline of a man who hadn't been sleeping. A forensic technician demonstrated how the fiber from the door jamb matched the watch on Mark's wrist. She spoke without flourish. The sound of her glove snapping off was louder than the testimony itself. The defense reached for doubt, contamination, mishandled samples, phantom intruders. But the jury watched Mark more than they listened. His stillness was unbearable, even his breathing seemed counted. When the scratches on his forearm were projected onto the screen, he rubbed his wrist once, the same wrist that bore the watch. At the back of the room, David Williams sat in shadow, free but smaller, the echo of his own humiliation flickering in his eyes. Detective Reyes testified last. "We thought jealousy made the story simple," he said. "But sometimes simplicity is camouflage." The closing statement was quiet. At 12:13, the prosecutor said, "Elena fought for her life." At 12:19, someone lowered the heat. At 12:22, the same house Wi-Fi woke. These are not the footsteps of a stranger. These are the minutes of a husband resetting a world he broke. When the jury filed out, the room exhaled. When they returned, the silence was absolute. Guilty. Mark blinked once. The muscles in his jaw tightened, nothing else moved. The watch face caught the fluorescent light and flashed, a single, sterile glint. The judge's sentence followed, deliberate, final. Years enough to erase freedom, never the act. Outside, rain threatened again. David stepped down the courthouse stairs, anonymous among the crowd, the weight of suspicion gone but leaving a different scar, the kind truth doesn't heal. Inside, Elena's mother pressed the scarf to her face. A quiet sob, then stillness. The detectives gathered their files, exhaustion settling where triumph should be. That night, evidence storage hummed with cold air. On a metal shelf, sealed in plastic, rested a smartwatch. Its screen flickered once, 12:13, before the battery died. In that final blink lived the record of everything that mattered, the moment she fought, the moment silence began, the minute the truth refused to stay buried.